Hey there, folks. It's Jay Frost speaking to you from, of course, the Philanthropy Mastermind series. It's really great to have you here. And I know that this is kind of an odd day for us. So I'm really appreciative of the fact that you're also tuning in on a Monday and on what is for many of us a holiday of one form or another. So when we scheduled this was the day that we had, and we are so grateful that you're taking a part of that day to be with us. And I know you won't regret it because of our guest today, who I'm sure is known to you, but I'm going to introduce to you in a minute. But before I do that, I want to welcome you. And not only that, but I want to welcome you particularly to the chat. And some of you are already taking the opportunity to go in there and say hello, which we really appreciate. Emily started that chain. Thank you, Emily. Good to see you from your new fiscally sponsored organization, but also Kelly and Kareen, Kimberly, Arnold, Karen, and all the rest of you who are tuning in and tuning into the chat. It's a great place for you to play, but also a repository for us to draw from when we're engaging you in this conversation. It's possible that some of you attended the meeting that we're going to talk about in a minute. Maybe others among you don't even know what it was all about. You're going to learn a lot about it today, and all of it will be deeply beneficial for you. You can already see that our guest today is already in the chat with you. So please do, if you would, if you haven't already done so, just say hello, maybe where you're from, which part of the country or the world, and which organization you're with, maybe. And we would love to know all of that. And then use that again as a place to engage the conversation with us, since we cannot see or hear you. You can also use the Q&A throughout. That's a great place if you want to post something anonymously and have a question answered there. When it comes to AI, which is our subject today, much of that content, it was also about responsible use or ethical use. And it is Ethics Month for AFP, by the way, so it's a perfect time to be discussing this. And that also means that sometimes the questions you have may be thorny. So if you want to put something anonymous, go ahead and put that in the Q&A. I also want to make sure I give a shout out to our sponsor for this entire series, DonorSearch. We won't be talking about them much today, aside from the introductions, unless our guest chooses to mention them for some reason. But you can learn all about DonorSearch over at their website at DonorSearch.net. Again, that's at DonorSearch.net, which is also the place where you can find recordings of literally hundreds of sessions in this series going back a number of years. That's all, again, under the resources tab, as well as their YouTube channel. So that's a lot of preamble to say hello, and to start by saying hello to Nathan Chappell, my friend, our friend, and also wears a number of monikers. So among them is serving as, of course, the co-founder of Fundraising.AI, and Fundraising.AI is something you want to look up. We're going to make sure we have links to all this stuff in the chat today. They had their summit, second annual summit just recently, where we're going to be talking about. He is also, of course, the co-author of The Generosity Crisis, a book that's made a big impression on lots of us in the field around the world over the last year. And of course, also serving as the senior vice president at DonorSearch AI. So lots of different hats that he wears. And it's really great to have a chance to just talk kind of informally about this amazing summit that you just held, Nathan. Thanks so much for taking time to do this.
Yeah, Jay, it's always such a treat. So any excuse to be able to chat with you for a little bit about, all things philanthropy, AI, philosophy. It's always a good day.
There's a lot to talk about here, and I don't want to assume too much on the part of what people might know who are tuning in either live or later for this recording. So do you mind just describing Fundraising.AI and what the summit was?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So thanks for everyone for joining in today and for your interest in the conversation. I think it's something that has been it's evolved over the last couple of years. So I think if you had asked me the same question, several years ago, it was this idea that I was working in a nonprofit. We started using machine learning and we noticed it worked quite well. And we recognized even at that time, so going back to like 2017, we're using machine learning, recognize this idea that with great prediction comes great responsibility, that there was a need to understand how AI was making decisions, whether or not it needed to be transparent, how do you explain things, how do you mitigate bias. And I think at the time, back in 2017, 2018, we had formed a small group of people. I mean, we're pretty small, maybe 30, 40. It grew to about 100 before COVID. And it was this idea that we wanted to shorten the learning curve, one, to make this technology more accessible and affordable. So shorten the learning curve, but also wrestle with some of the harder questions, like how do we ensure that AI doesn't remove humans from what is inherently a human endeavor, philanthropy. And that conversation was fairly nascent for a while. And then COVID happened, and most people were concerned more about where to get their toilet paper than they were what AI was doing. And then ChatGPT happened November 30th, 2022, and the floodgates just opened. And it was at AFP Icon. Actually, you just mentioned AFP Ethics. AFP Icon in New Orleans. So we invited 30 people, and about 70 people showed up. And I think you were there. And it was kind of this palpable angst, I guess, if you will, like anxiety, but also excitement about like this new frontier and what's going to happen. And I think it was that meeting that we actually decided, let's think about pulling together a group of people. And in my head, I immediately went to what I knew. And that was like, oh yeah, we might be able to get a few hundred people. That would be amazing. And Mallory Erickson, who's a good friend of mine, came up after and said, what if we had a few thousand people? And it kind of made me reframe what I was thinking fundraising AI could be. Fast forward, we ended up doing our first summit. You just mentioned we just finished our second. Our first summit was in October a year ago. And we had like 6,500 or about 6,000 people show up from 84 countries. And I guess if you had asked me, I would have said, okay, we checked the box, we did our thing. It's a lot of work. And the response was so positive, but also there was such a need to continue the conversation, to not just convince people to use AI, but to help educate people how to use it in a way that reduces harm. And so we just finished, as you said, the second annual summit 2 weeks ago, and we'll break it all down for you today. What we've learned, where we're at, where we're going. And we end up with 9,492 people registered from 141 countries. So it's pretty remarkable. So I think I can say now that we've kind of just begun. And as AI transforms and hopefully amplifies nonprofit mission, that we're all going to collectively learn how to use this in a way that does the most benefit, and also it simultaneously, mitigates potential harm.
Yeah. And in fact, it'll be fun to dig into that word, hopefully, because I know that's a lot of what you're really working on, is to make sure that it works in the ways that benefit this thing. Nathan, before we dive in too much, I'd love to know who among those who are with us live was at the summit. So if you were at the summit, just let us know.
Yeah.
We'd love to know that in the chat. And then we'll also know whether or not you want to participate in some way in this conversation as we go along. But Susanna, Amanda, it's good to see you there. And please, again, do let us know. And if you weren't, that may inform the questions you have about this. So thank you, Tandy. Well, we appreciate that too. The summit, I know, is a chance for a lot of people who are interested in this to get together, but especially with the second summit, what is it that was kind of the vision for what you wanted to address or let people discuss? Because you really had three different verticals. At least that's the way you organized it. So,
Yeah.
what was that all about? What did you hope to achieve through
Yeah.
that?
I mean, I think it's probably helpful to even take a step back so people understand what it is and what it isn't. I mean, the
Yeah.
reality is, and I will, give DonorSearch a ton of credit and reference here, is that when I started an AI startup in 2018, 2019, that was purchased by DonorSearch in 2020, December 2020. Before that, we were thinking about AI kind of in this black box. Like it was something that, it was just like we build this thing and we get patents on it and then we just, trust us kind of thing. When we started really thinking about what those long-term consequences could be and how the nonprofit sector is different, we built our entire practice at DonorSearch around this idea of transparent, explainable AI. And that is what led to fundraising AI's first framework for responsible AI. So actually before the summit, I went on this endeavor where we actually and had documented 1,700 emails from people all over the world that contributed to what is the first framework for responsible AI. It now lives in the first primary intention of fundraising AI, which is fundraising.ai. The URL is very easy to remember. If you can't remember that, we have bigger issues. And we're all doomed with AI. So that's really, really simple. The framework is there as an open source thing. It actually informed how we approach AI at DonorSearch in this fully explainable, transparent way. It now lives there as kind of a guide for others to adopt the similar kind of idea, is that if you can't interrogate something and it's not transparent, it's not explainable, how do you trust it? So that translated into this first summit, which was like, to be honest, even a year ago, I mean, ChatGPT's only been out for 20 months.
Mhm.
A year ago, we didn't really know where we would be today. We knew that it was happening. The technology was powerful in generative AI. We knew that it was going to change a lot of things. The first summit was much more just throw spaghetti on the wall. Like we kind of just found everyone we knew that was talking about AI in some regard, and we just put it all out there. But some of the feedback that we got, and we really listened to, actually, we used ChatGPT to analyze all the chat. We used it to analyze all the transcripts. We used it to analyze all the survey results from the one a year ago. And one of the biggest ahas was this idea that there are people at different walks of life. They're one, like in terms of their AI orientation, and in terms of whether they thought it was net good or bad, where they were in their journey. Like, I'm just beginning, I don't even know what to ask, versus someone that's using it 5 times before they have their first cup of coffee. And that missions are different. So people that were using AI in, human service organizations in Nairobi, very different than people that are using it for healthcare organizations in the US. And so there was just a lot of conversation over the last year of like, how do we build learning tracks that kind of correspond where people are at? In fact, we did a pre-summit survey so that we really were able to. Pre-summit survey wasn't just like, oh, this is going to be great, people are tuning in and they're going to learn. It was that we took that summit survey data and we actually brought it back to the speakers, and we're like, hey, just so you know, this is who is going to show up here. So, be cognizant of that. And it really helped inform, I think, both the quality of our presenters was top notch. I mean, first year there was a lot of trust. It's like, well, Nathan, you've never asked me for a favor, I guess I'll do it. I mean, Connor Grennan was that kind of person. I mean, he's got millions of followers, and he trusted that I, was going to steer him right. And the response was so good. The second year, we raised the bar on our presenters, and then we were able to empower those presenters with the data from the summit survey to know, hey, like 45% of the people that are going to attend your session are just starting their AI journey. And so that was really the premise behind the learning tracks. The benefit is for anyone who did not join the summit, a majority of actually the 9,500 people registered, only 3,500 people attended live. The average person who attended live spent 2 hours and 40 minutes. So there's, out of 80 speakers, there are 45 sessions and 80 speakers. There's so much more content to consume.
Mhm.
And the benefit of Fundraising AI, it's an open source platform that is member supported. So DonorSearch being kind of a leader in affording my time, but also as a paid sponsor, alongside all of our other sponsors, ensures that that content is free and accessible. And it's actually being this conversation, I was really excited. All of the videos are being chopped up right now, and they're going live on the website this week. So anyone who wasn't there, you have not missed a thing. You can go to those learning tracks that Jay was talking about. You can find the thing that you're looking for, whether it's on if what is the risk of AI, supporting humanitarian efforts, or how do I log in and think about ChatGPT? There's something for everyone. And I see Sal there. Sal and I just did a breakdown. Fundraise Up is a title sponsor of the
Mhm.
summit this year. We're so grateful for Fundraise Up. And he and I broke down a lot of the data last week, which was really fun.
Well, and I was going to say a couple things. One is that, and so thank you for Sal, for first of all for being here, but also for Fundraise Up's participation. There was an army of speakers. You've just alluded to that. There is also an army of sponsors. DonorSearch is one, Fundraise Up and
Mm-hmm.
many others, and all that information is available for folks at fundraising.ai. All that there right now, before it's all chopped up, like you just said, Nathan, you can register and you can see all the content in a block, and you can also scroll through it to find the content you want. But to the point of an anonymous attendee, always my favorite attendees, anonymous's question here, what will this cover today? The idea is to see if we can get some key takeaways, but I wanted some
Yeah.
context first for those who
Yeah.
did not attend or who haven't seen the content yet. So we'll do that, but also to see if we can give you kind of a primer. So as you enter that content or look through it, you can find the things that are going to be most beneficial to you, but maybe also that widen our lens. Since one of the things, at least I've seen, Nathan, and you can speak to this much better than I could, is that I think we come to this where we are. You talked about ChatGPT as being kind of an entry point for many people 20 months ago. So people, one person might have been going in there, like someone in the chat said, to review their work or to refine a proposal document, or like Gail had talked about here in the series a couple years ago now about writing initial fundraising plans. But that's very much almost a tactical use given where we are. But there's so much more that it potentially could do or do badly. So as you were thinking about through the content and offering all that to folks, how do you kind of balance those things? Then we'll get to key takeaways between just making sure there's something for everyone, the spaghetti on the wall of the first year, but
Yeah.
also so that people can inform the way that they think about and utilize AI so it really benefits their organizations and their mission and purpose.
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing that up. And, and it's hard because, people, it's hard to accommodate everyone. And again, we have some people that are like, this might be, they are deathly afraid and they've actually kind of said, I'm never going to use AI. And so they're the skeptics that we have to convince to say, look, you must, because the rules of business have changed. And therefore, if your mission is important, you should use all the tools that are available. To others that may take a much more liberal approach and actually might be using AI so much that it actually could have unintended consequences. So we were very conscious at the beginning of the summit to level set two things, like what is AI first, and then what is responsible versus beneficial AI. And so really, we actually our very first part of the summit, and we kind of make this a thing now we do just to make sure everyone is kind of thinking through the same thing. So AI essentially is a general technology that replicates things that once humans did. So it's not a replacement for humans, but it's essentially mimics things that humans once did. And most people know the famous story in 19 whatever 96 of AI being programmed to beat the grandmaster at chess, right? So we got to a point, it actually, by the way, took from 1955, they thought they could teach a computer how to play chess in one summer in 1955. That didn't happen until I think it was 96 or somewhere around there. And we know now that you can't beat an AI at playing chess, and nobody can. And then the next big frontier was, playing the game Go. And there's a documentary called AlphaGo, which is, something that they thought it requires so much intuition that AI would never be able to do. So we learned that AI could essentially kind of build it could calculate things so fast that it appeared to be intuitive. And so still fast forward to today, most people are familiar with AI in the newer sense, which is generative AI.
Mm-hmm.
That's ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot or Anthropic Claude or Perplexity or Gemini, Google Gemini. And that's almost many people's entire orientation. It's like, I just know it as like this thing that I type a prompt and I have it write a poem about my dog having a picnic on the moon. But there's another side of AI that's based on predictions, and that's predictive AI. And predictive AI is about taking lots of data. So we think about, from a nonprofit perspective, all the data that you kind of circles around your nonprofit. Like, how do you make decisions based on that data? And then the generative AI side is like, how do you activate those predictions? And so we're living in this really interesting and dynamic and important time in history where we have the ability to like get clarity around decisions through predictive AI. But this new tool in large language models is that we can activate those predictions. So it's like I I mean, I am a technologist, I am an early adopter, but and so there's some bias in this. I'm like super excited about having both sides of that coin, predictive and generative working together, because that's something that's very new and exciting. So one is educating people. The other is, though, not trying to convince people to use it because they're missing out. And I think one of the biggest risks is that, we create this AI hype and AI FOMO. It's like, you have to use it. And, if you don't, you're like not one of the cool kids, or if you don't use it, you're going to miss out and you're never going to catch up. I became much, much, much more concerned about educating people on how to use it well versus trying to convince people how to use it. And that's very different, because my first 5 years in AI were all about educating people on like, this is not a fad and it's not going away and it's not crypto and it's, it's something that's going to be here. And, my TEDx, I did TEDx on this in 2018, like AI in the future of generosity is TEDx. I mean, it's like, it's insane to think I spent all my time just trying to convince people, hey, you better pay attention. And about 2 years ago, I became really concerned more about this gross adoption, this like mass adoption without any concern of long-term consequences. So fundraising AI and, my work more and more on, in an advisory capacity with, say, Nonprofit Alliance, which is it bringing things to the White House, is on this idea that the nonprofit sector's definition of responsible AI can't look the same as Microsoft and Amazon and Google. The nonprofit sector operates in the currency of trust. We don't sell cell phones or tennis shoes or any of those things. Therefore, our framework, really by definition, for what we consider responsible can't be the same as Amazon or Microsoft or Google or whoever you're kind of following. By definition, those organizations are valued by the stock market based on how quickly they scale, and has created this arms race for mass deployment. We all see it. I mean, the pace of AI advancement is so fast because this arms race. I mean, and it's based on money essentially. The nonprofit sector is a bit more free to think about this idea of like, okay, well, first of all, ethics according to whom? So do we just follow ethics according to, and I'm not saying that any of these organizations are unethical for sure, but any of the big companies that are building the large language models that we use, they're built from ethical standards based on what they view are ethical. And we can dive into this. But there's a part of it that goes beyond ethics, which, we've learned from social media that things can appear to be ethical. Like social media, no one really thinks is unethical by design, right? When it was designed to bring people together, essentially. That was the original intention, to connect people in new and innovative ways. But even though it's not unethical by design, it's had many unintended consequences. Right. Increases in anxiety, increases in depression, decreases in happiness, increases in teen suicide, and the list goes on and on and on. The doom scrolling kind of world that we live in now, I mean, has kind of made us numb to just information overload. So the nonprofit sector has this opportunity to look at those things and to say, look, not only do we have to build this in a responsible way, but we also have to do it in a way that mitigates harm in the future. And so we can be that voice of reason to the private sector. I really believe this. I feel like this is an area the nonprofit sector can lead the next technological, awakening, if you will, because we don't have the same financial incentives that the big firms have. We can say, look, hey, pause. Like we must use these technologies, but we must use them in a way that contributes to the long term of human welfare and the planet and for future generations. We can't build these technologies and deploy them at any cost.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so,
And with that, I know that we can also discuss, and maybe we should, as we go further in the conversation, about whether or not, in fact, nonprofits, if they have their own ethical standards, which I know this is one of the purposes of this whole discussion, if they actually have the leverage of those things when the people who are primarily responsible for creating these tools, as you say, their purpose is a shareholder purpose. It's
right.
to make money. It's not about harming civilization, but it certainly isn't about necessarily helping it either. It's just about, having the change come through the machine.
Yeah, capitalism. I mean, and
Right.
we benefit from capitalism as well. But when we look at how many papers are written on AI safety to AI scale, it's about a 60 to 1 ratio on scale over safety. In terms of dollars, so it's hard to substantiate this, but we're now talking about large language models that cost $1 billion to build or multi-billion dollars, that for every dollar spent on safety, about $1,000 is spent on scale. So, I mean, and again, that's because that's how capital markets work, but it doesn't mean that lessens the burden that we have in the nonprofit sector, and frankly, the opportunity to be that voice of reason, because we don't have the same financial incentives, that we can say, hey, we must use these, but let's time out. Let's at least, I mean, even at an individual organizational level, and this is where it becomes really practical. One is ensure that you have some sort of framework for responsible AI in your organization. You should have, AI data governance, but alongside data governance, you should have AI governance. And data governance covers things like we don't use data that is inherently biased, right? That's things that we, should all hold very near and dear to our organizations. But AI governance goes into, we're not going to use AI that we can't explain, or that intentionally, creates harm, or even beyond that. We have safeguards within our organization that we pause and we think about, like, if we continue to do this, like, what could the unintended consequences be? And at least asking the question doesn't mean that you don't do anything, but it means you move forward and then you pause, and you move forward and then you pause to reassess, like, how does this AI serve? How does it promote and protect trust? How does it bring our constituents in closer connection with us? And so I think there's nothing magic about this. It's about being deliberate and strategic and thoughtful about technology and its ability to not just help us generate revenue, but to help us build, a more thriving philanthropy ecosystem.
So one of the things I know that some people will ask, especially for those who are new to AI, still, like you said, around 45% of the people attending,
Yeah.
they're still at the beginning of this adoption curve. They may not have a guideline or
Yeah.
a template for creating these things. So was that one of the things that came from
Yes.
either Summit 1 or Summit 2? And where can people access that so they can have a guide for creating some policies on both of those issues internally?
Yeah, and to be honest, I think this is where small organizations have a distinct advantage. One is that a small AI powered organization
Mhm.
now is power boosted by like every consultant you could ever imagine. Philanthropic advisors, like if you didn't have a grant writer before, you have a grant writer now. If you can't afford a fundraising coach, you now have a fundraising coach. You have someone to role play with you. You like all these incredible things that you have access to. I think it was between Summit 1 and Summit 2 that we started to see some of these use cases. So it really goes back to that idea where we started with this framework. The framework has 10 pillars, and fundraising.ai framework, 10 pillars of things like, be responsible. They're all things that people would, know and believe anyway. But it goes a little bit deeper into, like, if you're going to use predictive AI, make sure that it's transparent, make sure that it's explainable. You understand the math, and there's humans in the loop, and all those good things. But the advantage of small nonprofits is that they don't have a lot of bureaucracy. Actually, I see some large nonprofits actually struggling more with this because they're so bureaucratic. They're like, well, who has to be on our AI strike team or task force? And, like, how do we define AI, and, all the crazy things like that, small organizations don't have to deal with. But I'll use Dan Kershaw, and I, probably have to pay him royalties every time I say his name because it's almost every day now. And Dan Kershaw is a director of Furniture Bank in Toronto, Canada. Very small organization. They essentially have a very, very specific purpose, that they provide furnishings to households that literally sleep on the floor, that can't afford, pots and pans or furniture to sleep on, or whatever it might be. Is Dan Kershaw, I would say, is creative, but number one, he's curious. Like, I think he just has this curiosity mindset, and he was saying, how can AI serve me and my small organization, and how can we, instead of, you know, operating like a 5-person nonprofit, how do we operate like a 25-person nonprofit? And so he actually went on to fundraising.ai framework, copied it. It's open source, just literally copy it. He put it in ChatGPT. He also told it ChatGPT about the values of his organization and what they do. And he had ChatGPT convert that framework into a manifesto, which is actually lives on their website. You can go to furniturebank.org, I think, /manifesto. And he explains, like, why they felt it was important to use AI, how they use AI, and how they view responsible AI. I mean, it's such a good example because it cost him $0 to do that. And I'm guessing a day of work, ish, to do that. And now he's been interviewed by the Chronicle of Philanthropy. He's been, like, I mean, he's leveled up like 10 levels above what he could have done before. And also doing, using very responsible ways. He's using image generation through Mid-Journey, or whatever he's using, Dolly, I think, to create images in a very responsible way. So I want people to really know that this is like not the same AI that used to be inaccessible and very expensive, that this is the time where you have access to some really powerful technology. If used responsibly, it can be used to increase trust. It can be used to amplify your mission in ways that were never before possible because of just the cost of doing so. So yeah, I hope people don't ever listen to fundraising AI and think, oh, that's just for the rich organizations. Like that's just for the big guys because they can afford that. Um, it's AI is democratized now, and I think small organizations have a very distinct advantage.
Yeah, I guess like any technology, the challenge with that, however, is still not having these kinds of manifestos or guidelines for ethical use or communication internally in the organization. And I've just put some of that in the chat, and
Yeah.
then Jack has updated that, so you all can take a look at both Furniture Bank, but also the Fundraising.AI framework, and grab those for yourselves. Nathan, I know that we have some questions here, and we have lots more
Oh,
to talk about, but I want to make sure we fulfill that promise about some of the key
yeah.
takeaways. These will come just from your perspective, of course. There were 88 speakers. I'm trying to remember how many there were, but what were your key takeaways from what you experienced this year?
It's a hard question because it was so broad, right? I mean, and it was kind of something for everyone. I would say, for me, some of the key takeaways were very different than a year ago, that the thread of responsible AI and beneficial AI was woven into every session. And last year, much more on just like on gross adoption, like just like adopt or you're going to miss out. Adopt and because it's cool, or adopt because you got FOMO. I would say one of my biggest, I think, moments of pride and excitement was seeing how, and without really any prompting, how every speaker wasn't there just to talk about using AI, but they were weaving in these like threads of responsibility, that we have this responsibility, especially in the nonprofit sector. So I think that was really intriguing. I think some of the most watched attendees were early in the morning. So we actually had pre-sessions, one from Nairobi, one from the UK, Australia, um, Chinesa Tiakolo, who's Times 100 most influential people in AI, and her work in AI in the global South. So I was able to interview her like a week before, and it actually surprised me. The pre-recorded sessions had some of the highest attendance, and that was a lot of people dialing in from other countries. And I mean, with 141 countries, it was like pretty amazing. Like Kenya was the sixth most populated country in terms of who attended. And to be honest, I think what we've learned is that some of the biggest opportunities to learn on how AI is innovating is from countries where the need for innovation is the greatest. The small organizations, scrappy, but curious and creative. And I think many of those sessions in the early part of the day that were relating to AI in either developing nations or other nations, like I think there's just a lot of rich content and lessons learned from there. Um, yeah, so I think for me that was a little bit of a surprise. That actually made us, we had a because Sunday's the only day that we actually have time to do anything. Had a call yesterday with Mallory Erickson planning for 2026, 25. What year is next?
25.
25. Next year. Okay. Let's not skip a year, although it might be appealing. Um, is to really think. We actually spent a lot of time thinking about how do we infuse more, like even start earlier in the day to infuse more content for people in other countries that are not in Pacific time or North American, kind of standard time. So that to me was like one of the biggest epiphanies from the summit overall. But I think other than that, seeing still a very large distribution of where people are at. I think the number one thing that we've learned, again, and this is consistent, is that a majority of people still have a lack of understanding of what tools are available. And so, they feel a little bit, it's like, okay, well, now I can define AI and I can understand what responsible and beneficial is, but like, what tool do I use for my organization? And there still seems to be a pretty big gap there. Like, there's a bigger desire to use AI, but less on how to evaluate good versus bad, which is a binary way of saying it. But like, what tools use, and I think those are where the case studies come out.
And so for that, because I know that's going to be important to our audience, is the kind of tactical applications of tools. Where do you send people so they have some kind of guidance for that for the case studies?
Well, I would say, a really good place to start is actually look at our sponsorship list, because these are companies that, uh, you know, beyond just promoting their company, actually, because there's like many competitors that are sponsoring. I mean, of course, you've got, DonorSearch and Kindsight, who's that we kind of operate in this kind of competitive environment. But we both put it aside to say, look, for the betterment of our sector, this is where we all come together.
Mhm.
So to be honest, there's a vetting with the sponsors of Fundraising AI that shows that an organization cares more about the sector overall than their own, just what am I going to get out of it? And of course there's benefits. Like Fundraise Up is a good example of like being seen as a leader of the responsible AI movement is, there's brand recognition there. But I would say any of the companies that are faint of heart and only looking at just generating revenue from nonprofit, they wouldn't be sponsoring. Only the sponsor. So, and again,
Well, they're all signing on to those ethical principles to participate at all.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. I mean, they have to adhere to the framework essentially to even be able to sponsor. So there are organizations that we would not take money from. So again, I said it's the vetting in a way that, I think about, and looking at the sponsorship list there. I mean, there's AI being used by all those organizations, and each of those organizations commitment to responsible AI transcends just what's in it for them. And I think that's special and kind of unique about our sector, which is really unique. I would also listen to a lot of those sessions. I mean, Sal did a session for Fundraise Up, and Scott Rosenkrantz did one for DonorSearch, and Shireen Koshi did one for Kindsight. And listen in for, what are those use cases and case studies? Like for us, from a donor search perspective, and I'll wear that hat for a second because I mean it's something that I wear proudly, but we have lots of case studies where, it's not just us talking about it. Don't listen to organizations that just talk about themselves. Listen to what their customers say about it. Like, how did it change their perspective on using technology to build trust? Or how did it change their perspective on how to think about, you know, good versus bad prospects? Or, so I would say, really dive in, and in throughout the entire summit, there were use cases kind of threaded throughout of like, we use this tool and this is, the experiences that we've had. And I think those were really powerful.
Nathan, if you were having to choose among all the favored relatives, nobody wants to have to do that, but someone, let's say, only had those 2 hours, the average listening time, 2.5 hours, and you just needed to pick maybe 3 sessions as an entry point for this,
Uh,
what might those be?
that's so hard. I mean, again, we when we actually had surveys done of like which were the most popular sessions and things like that. It's unfair. For me, I'm super biased in this because Cassie Kozakov is someone who I've admired and followed for a long time, like in like probably like borderline creepy way. I've like watched every single thing she's done on like YouTube, because she was the head of decisions. She actually pioneered decision sciences at Google, and to have her on, and a lot of people said that was their favorite session overall, but there were people that were like, "This is just too much for me. Like it was just too too advanced."
Mm.
I'd say if you're thinking about like, I'm new into this and I want to think of a balanced way of how AI will serve humanity's best interest, I would say Randy Fernando's session was phenomenal. Like, I mean, TED Talk style session on how do you know if AI will serve humanity's best interest. Also, not for the faint of heart. I would say, but will really cause you some opportunity to really think about the actions that I'm going to take in using AI. But also one of the most practical, like I'm just brand new and I don't know where to go. In fact, I think we're looking at hiring him to do these sessions for all of our entire team. Was Tim Lockey, and Tim Lockey at the Human Stack, because he created a platform 2 years ago. We had breakfast. We had a debate, I guess, if you will. And he said nonprofits shouldn't even be thinking about AI because they have bigger problems. Like they need to figure out, if they're going to use a CRM or not. And we had this really healthy debate. 2 years later, he has this recorded platform called AI for Anyone, and it breaks it down to the human elements of like at kind of a mass learning kind of scale. Really, really healthy. I mean, he created it kind of for people in mind that weren't really sure where to even start, and it's fantastic. And so I would say Cassie, Randy Fernando, Tim Lockey, but it's so unfair because there's so many other really, really, I mean, they're all, we had Afua Bruce. I mean, amazing. Like Afua Bruce is like one of the top AI ethicists in our field right now. She has so much wisdom. So I'd be leaving a lot of people out. I would encourage people literally commit to watching like five. They're short, 35 minutes. Like these are short sessions. They're meant to be like digestible because AI can get heady and overwhelming. But I would start with a couple and then just peel back the onion and add that to your weekly. This doesn't have to happen now, like throughout the next year, find, one 30-minute thing a week, and it's going to guide you through, a year's worth of learning.
Right. In fact, one of the speakers, I can't remember who, said at the opening of a session that you may not know because you're watching this individually, but there are a lot of people and there's a lot of energy in this room, and that's definitely true for the summit. But I wonder if maybe in addition to being able to watch a little bit at a time for oneself,
Yeah.
also to be able to use that as a discussion point for our organizations, because one of the issues with anything, especially that involves ethics or adoption of new technology, is everybody understanding things the same way? Is everyone willing to apply them in the same way? Is everyone going to follow the policy we adopt in the same way? Are you finding that people, sort of like your book, are taking the content from the summit and then using that to sit down and discuss some tough issues within nonprofits about ethics and related issues?
We're seeing a lot more of that now than we were. I mean, I think there's a lot more enlightenment around this idea that not all technology is just net good, right?
Right.
That no technology is good. I think I'm broken in a way because I can't evaluate any technology at face value. I go to the dark side very quickly. So, Notebook LM came out 2 Saturdays ago. And I got a text. Cherry and Koshi actually texted me, and he sent me this thing, which basically a podcast, right? And I
Right.
I listened to it for like 3 minutes, and I called him and I'm like, is this what I think it is? And he's like, it is. And then I was like, oh my gosh. And so you see, for about 4 minutes, I'm like, this is amazing, like best technology ever created on the face of this earth. 5 minutes later, I'm having
Right.
it do really nefarious things and actually do a podcast on why humans are no longer essential in fundraising, which it gladly did. And so, don't follow me if you just want roses and sunshine. I promise you it will not be that way. But if you want a balanced kind of perspective on, hey, we need to use this technology because our missions deserve it, the same way that you would never consider not using the internet. It would be egregious to say our organization's not going to use the internet because the internet teaches, there's cyberbullying and it teaches kids to do bad things or whatever it might be, or humans to do bad things. Like you use technology because your mission deserves it, but you use it in a measured and strategic way. The same exact thing is true with AI. And looking at how we disclose that, how we use it to increase transparency, we need to on our websites put on there that we use AI in, to enhance the donor experience because,
Yeah.
we just did a survey, as with 1,006 donors in the US, and that was the number one loudest recommendation of any of it. You don't even have to read the report, is to know that donors feel like the use of AI is appropriate, but it should be disclosed and it should be transparent.
Well, and that's also true for podcasting. So the podcast community has come together.
Mm.
Many of us have signed a statement about
Hmm.
ethical use and the transparency about the use of AI in any application of a podcast, whether it's editing or transcription, but certainly about fake voices reading
Right.
whatever it is that
Yeah.
they generate. That's Notebook LM for those who are unfamiliar with it and want to
Right.
play with it, but just be aware that there's already some backlash because of that, the way it kind of treats the uncanny valley. And I know we have some questions here, Nathan, and I want to make sure we honor these questions. So I'll just try to
Yeah.
tackle them. One came in earlier from Kelly, who had said, when looking at AI tools to use in fundraising for writing the messaging or building charts and graphs with our data, where do I look to know who owns the data once that information is put into that tool or resource?
Yeah.
And there's a privacy question really embedded in
Yeah.
this. What are your
Get
thoughts?
these questions a lot. I mean, it's a very well-known kind of understood statement that if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. And that's just not just AI, but any technology. If you're not paying for the product, you are the product. What you get when you're paying for a product is more control over privacy. And so I just use ChatGPT as an example. If you pay the $20 a month, you have the ability to, essentially turn on additional privacy settings that you do not get for the free version. But they also have enterprise versions. So I would assume, unless you're very aware, everyone's responsible for responsible AI. Unless you're very aware of where your data is going and that you're in a closed system, never put anything confidential in a large language model. That would be donor information, that it's not public. If you got it from the public, from the internet, then it's already public. But there are enterprise levels. So I have many hospitals that I've talked to and work with that have a closed version of Microsoft Copilot. They can put in patient information. It's completely enclosed within their ecosystem and completely secure from that perspective. But if you don't know, don't put in confidential information. But you could put an anonymous information, and you can essentially change things to say, instead of saying, I'm going to interview a donor whose name is this and is this age and given this much information, you can generalize and say, I'm going to interview a donor that has a certain persona and makes decisions based on the environmental impact or whatever it might be, and then use that persona to help, role play with me or whatever it might be. So all that to say is there's lots of ways to not put in confidential information. If you don't know, don't do it. If you do know, then and your security team has told you it's fine. Um, I will say that it's a smart question to ask, because the same companies that say your data is safe, so OpenAI, which I've done a lot of things with, and others say, hey, your data is safe with us. It's never been safer. Apple's doing the same thing with their new version. It shouldn't be lost on you that those same companies are being sued for stealing data. So like same company who's saying your data is safe are also being sued by the New York Times and YouTube or wherever for stealing data to train their models. So let's just not be naive and use common sense to understand, like, responsible AI is my responsibility. It's not only the responsibility of the organizations that are building it.
Yeah. Now, Arnold had asked a question earlier, which is kind of the flip side of your conversation with me about small nonprofits. I guess we sort of intuitively understand it. Smaller organizations sometimes struggle to adopt either new technology or have a policy for using it, or even knowing maybe what's in a vendor's, toolkit. But he's pointing this out in the question: why do you think large nonprofits struggle with AI? Because you've seen that too. Why is that?
Oh, all the time. I mean, success or failure of, I've been working in the machine learning predictive AI side since 2017. Success or failure every time, 100% of the time, for us and for my work is always dependent on the organization itself, the culture of the organization, and whether they accept or reject change. So change management, and I wrote about this on LinkedIn recently, this curiosity mindset. I think, number one asset that an individual can have today, it's not about information, it's about connecting dots. It's about connecting dots, and you do that by being curious. And this idea that, organizations' success or failure will be based on whether or not they adapt or they reject change. Large organizations often don't like change because there's just more stakeholders. And so, it takes a lot more to change a large organization than it does a small. And I've worked at both. And I can tell you, when you're in a large organization, I was at UC San Diego, and, I was told when I started that it would take 6 months to hire someone. I was like, are you kidding? It should take 6 minutes. Like I used to do this like in 6 minutes. It doesn't take 6 months. But after 5 years there, I was high-fiving someone when I got it done in 4 months. Like it was just like, we broke a record. We hired someone in 4 months. So that's just part of like large organizations and the number of stakeholders and the number of people that either don't like change or want to be a part of the change. So I think that is a distinct advantage of small organizations right now.
I know we may have other questions here. I already see one that I'm going to ask you, Nathan, but I want to invite people, if you have a last minute question or even observation, perhaps you are a participant in this summit, or maybe you just want to make an observation about AI, this is the right time to do it. Go ahead and put that in the chat or the Q&A so we can ask that at the end. And before we get to those, I just want to point out that we do have some sessions coming up, which I hope you all will join us for. And that includes something that is, focused on AI once again. This is two people I know that you know, Nathan. Jamie Davis, who's the Director of Prospect Development at World Vision, along with her colleague Samuel Warner, who's a
Sam.
data
Yeah.
analyst there. They are going to be talking about unlocking the power of AI for prospect identification. A session they did at APRA was quite well received. They're going to be doing that with us here on Tuesday, October 22nd. And then on Thursday, Cassie Gruenstein is going to be here to talk about addressing burnout. So if you're already burned out after hearing us talk about AI for the last hour, don't be. First of all, there's lots more to learn, and it's a lot of fun in addition to challenging, but you can at least commiserate with and maybe learn from a person who's battled burnout. That's going to be
Yeah.
next Thursday. And then I'll just give a little longer view, which is the following Tuesday. We do have Amy Newman, who's got a new book out, Pursuant to AI, talking about harnessing AI for nonprofit success. And that is on October 29th, right before our last session of the month, which is, of course, horror stories. So I hope you'll join me for that and hear about all the things you should not do. That's on the 31st. Anyway, so Nathan, I know we had a question here from Liz earlier asking if AI will ever become, and I know this is really hard to guess, but you're watching some of the trends, if it will ever become expensive to access, especially from a nonprofit affordability standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, AI is more affordable and accessible than it's ever been, and I think it will continue. I mean, the reality is that so models, the compute power is more affordable than ever. Data storage is more affordable than ever. I mean, up until 2 years ago, AI was cost prohibitive for most nonprofits, and so, when we're getting to a point, I really anticipate in the next 2 to 3 years the convergence between predictive AI and generative AI will become almost ubiquitous. That we're already seeing the ability of generative AI to do really, really good analysis of things. When it starts to do predictions, that will become much, much more affordable. And so generative AI is either free or nearly free, $20 a month. The reality is the ROI of generative AI, is really about doing, so when we're talking about burnout, it's about doing work better, faster, and being happier in the end because you're offloading things you don't like to do. It's almost something you can't afford or you can't afford not to do. And so if you're paying $20 a month for something, but you save 1 hour a week or 1 hour a month, even, it's already paid for itself. But most estimates will show that a team that's trained in generative AI can save at the minimum 20% of their time, but at maximum around 50% of their time. We're talking 20% of your time is an extra day a week that you would have, to do more human-centric things, ideally. And so I think it becomes almost a thing. Again, like all you have to do is question, like, what would I do today if I wasn't using the internet? Like, how much more work if you had to actually pull up a pen and pencil or piece of paper to your work, or to do analysis on your own, or research things from on a microfiche. Like, I mean, we know the benefits of that technology can have. So it's already affordable, and it's going to continue to get more affordable.
I know that some of the things that people still think about here, and maybe this can be kind of like a speed round because you've addressed them so many times before. The fears that people have, it's perfect time to be talking about that.
Mm-hmm.
So whether or not they're real or not. I know you've already talked enough about cyberdyne systems and robots taking over the earth, so we won't ask that. But what about whether or not it's replacing our jobs, and specifically fundraising jobs? Is that a legitimate fear, or do you see, especially through the summit, that that's something that people just worry too much about?
I mean, I don't get invited to a lot of dinner parties, and there's probably a reason. I mean, the book I wrote behind me is probably indication of that. I mean, the general sense is that AI won't replace fundraisers, but fundraisers who use AI will replace those that don't. That's been the general sense of like most jobs. But I think that any job that's like highly routine, that follows certain rules and is more routine, has a greater risk of being replaced, essentially. But if I think about prospect research, right? I mean, this is an area that I think is very concerned about AI, but it's also one of the areas that has the most to benefit. So you take the task of actually researching people, making sure that accuracy is really important. Hallucinations are down to less than 5% now in AI. They'll get to near zero in the next year. But if you could take a prospect researcher that was spending a lot of time just pulling data, but using AI to essentially aggregate that data and produce it in a way that was more digestible by the end user, that prospect researcher now becomes an analyst, or they become a consultant, or they become a, for me, and I led nonprofit teams for 20 years, having someone who is an advocate and a liaison and a strategist is far more valuable for me as a fundraising leader than someone just pulling and aggregating data. And so I think where the areas that AI will replace jobs, and it will, there are also as many jobs that will be leveled up in their ability to add strategic value to those organizations. If you're willing and you're curious, like if you are just in your head in the sand and you're saying absolutely no, the world will pass you by. Like you don't have to worry about convincing people to use AI. That will happen. But if you have a curiosity mindset and you're just asking, well, what if right now? And you're going to be invaluable to your organization in new ways, in more important ways than it would have been before.
Nathan, this will have to be the last one. Last 30 seconds. We had a question from Liz, and I'm sure you've answered this one before, which is, what is the best way to get your nonprofit team on board with using AI? Maybe the board as well.
Oh man, there's so many sessions. I would actually go to Tim Lockey's thing and just to kind of get over some of those hurdles. I do a lot of this training on just like getting started and creating an AI mindset. I think it almost always starts from one practical use case. So start very small, one practical use case. Like I had AI write auction descriptions instead of me having to spend an hour to write an auction description, and then allow that to be just a catalyst for, one more thing. If you can convince a skeptic, and the reality is you don't have to convince the skeptics. The market will take care of them themselves if they choose not to use this. This is not, genie's not going back in the bottle. I'd say worry about how you're leveraging AI yourself, and others will follow that example because they'll see you outperforming um, others very quickly, no doubt. And if you don't trust me on that, call me. I'll show you how. And if you don't know how AI can support you in your job, all you have to do is ask it. All you have to do is ask it.
And maybe that's it. That's it for now. There's so much more we could dig into, but I'm grateful that you took the time for this, Nathan, especially after all that work to create that giant conference. I know with many people, Mallory especially, but so many other colleagues, and we'll all look forward to it next year. And if people want to learn more about that, in addition to seeing all that 9.5 hours of content, I hope you'll go and take a look at that at the at Fundraising.AI site. It's all there and free and available for you to not only learn from, but discuss with your colleagues, because we need to all be informed and on an equal playing field, big or small organizations alike. Thank you very much, Nathan. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, people can follow me on LinkedIn. If you want to hear more about the pros and cons of this technology, follow me. If you don't want to hear about that, absolutely don't follow me, because that's what I do. Yeah, so, and thank you, Jay, for facilitating the conversation, always bringing such wisdom and insight to our sector in a really balanced way. So appreciate all you do.
Thank you so much, Nathan. Really appreciate you, and I really appreciate everybody being here. I hope you'll show up for our next sessions, and make sure to take a look at the websites that we mentioned. We'll make sure to put those in the show notes as well. You will be receiving an email with a link to the recording here, so you can share this with colleagues and then knock these issues around a bit. So till next time, everybody, thanks again and take care.
Awesome.
Thank you,
everyone.